Hey guys, so this is going to be a little bit slower, a little bit drier. It's going to be all the technical info for the Vintage Story Archipelago integration. We're going to go through what I learned doing it, what I think will help the next guy go faster, and kind of the pitfalls that you can just avoid. The number one pitfall, the number one thing you can do is not use AI. I have developer friends that swear by it. They say it makes them so much faster and better, and like, I tried. I tried to get Copilot to give me one usable line of code. He could not. So, 5 hours of fighting with Copilot gaslighting me, telling me that two strings that are kind of similar will confuse the compiler? No. Or 1 hour of just reading the API. So that's where we're going to start. We're going to talk about which APIs I used for Vintage Story Archipelago into. So I guess where we start is explaining what the goal is. Archipelago is a multi-world randomizer. It takes randomizers for many different unrelated games, combines the item pools, and then disperses items from this game to that game. If I'm playing Zelda and you're playing Pokemon, you can find my hook shot and I can find your bicycle and it'll get sent over the network to you. It's super rad. It takes a little bit of setup. So the three things that make this mod possible are Archipelago, which is written in Python, Vintage Story mods, which are written in C#, and then there's a library that makes interfacing with Archipelago easy with C#. So when I went in, I had no idea how any of these three things work. I picked them up pretty quickly because they're actually all set up pretty well. So Archipelago is responsible for modeling the world with items and locations so that other games understand what it is we're doing, where to place the items, what's relevant at what times, pathing, that sort of thing. It's actually pretty cool, but each game that is supported needs a world. And so we go into the worlds folder. And you can see that the supported games are, A Hat in Time, A Link to the Past, all these things. And you can go in here. And if you go to like Mega Man Battle Network, you will find examples of what they've written, right? What do their locations look like? And you'll see a whole bunch of gobbledygook that doesn't make any sense to you because we don't know how any of this works. It also modifies a ROM, so we're doing direct memory access, and the client's included, and that's just not what we're doing. All we want to understand is how to do locations and items and get a minimum viable product. Now, this isn't mentioned anywhere in the docs that I saw, but AP Quest, if you go in here, each of these files, like locations, is going to have each section broken down with really good comments. Whoever wrote this, thank you so much. But yeah, AP Quest is the example that you want. You're going to go in here, you're just going to copy the whole folder. You're going to go through line by line, reading the comments, changing these things to what are relevant for your game. In our case, Vintage Story. So that's the first thing. Use the AppQuest folder as your template for Archipelago's side of things. It will get you all the way to where you need to be. So then we jump over to Vintage Story. We want to start making mods for Vintage Story. It's just simple C#. It compiles into a DLL. You include that DLL, and that is your mod. There's a little bit more. You got to write like a mod info and stuff. But the API is broken down into three major parts, which are the API client, the API server, and comment. It's exactly what it sounds like. But it can be a little confusing, right? So the important thing here is that you do not try to cross client and server. They share functions from common, but they do not share context with each other. So if you write something in start server side, and you do like your server API, you cannot access any of this from the client, and you cannot access the client from any of this. So in here we register like on player join, right? Whenever that event gets fired from the server, we're going to call the function on player join. So if we come in here, and if we were to write Cappy instead of Sappy here, if we would try to access the client, we'll get a crash. We'll get a null object reference error. And that is because they do not share context. So it's very important to split things in your mind and in your code, server side, client side. So once we get a handle on the Vintage Story API, the question becomes, what does it actually need to do to be a client for Archipelago? And there's a list in the repo that you can see, but the main things are you have to be able to report locations as checked, you have to be able to receive items, and you have to be able to place items from other worlds into your world for you to find. When you have ROMs like Mega Man Battle Network, you modify the memory and you create a patch so that it's just a static set, this is always there. We didn't really have that option with Vintage Story. We have to do things at runtime. There's no static world to modify. We could have gone that route, modified saves, done some weird stuff, but we didn't. So for a couple of those things, the bridge library really helps us out. So we come in here and the main concept is that there's a session and that session has helpers. So we create a session which connects us to the Archipelago server. And in here we get access to like items. This is going to handle items coming in so that we can do that without writing a bunch of packet code directly. Locations is going to let us just mark stuff as checked, and that will just send it out. We have to do virtually nothing there. We just have to report to this helper that a location was checked. Very easy. I love it so much. So what we do have to do for any client, but for Vintage Story, is figure out how to get items to the player. So we're dealing with two servers, the Archipelago server and the game server. The Archipelago server, we're going to use that bridge library to communicate everything we need there. We're not going to write any code that talks directly with it. We're going to go through the multiclient.net. For the Vintage Story server, we needed to build some kind of protocol to talk between the Vintage Story client and the Vintage Story server. Because when items come in, we have to tell the server to give us an item. And a lot of the events that we want to hook into are only server side, so the server has to tell the client that they've achieved something. So we built the multi-world VS network. And what this does is it establishes two channels for communication, one to the server, one to the client. It defines the kinds of messages it can send, which are just little classes, little tiny baby classes. Client AP item receive packet is a list of items and which player sent it. That's it. But I also wanted each player to have their own integration. So I wanted them to have their own item pools, their own player name, their own locations to check. That way it wasn't the whole server trying to find charcoal and then it's done for everyone. Each player has to find their own charcoal. Now you could just play with one guy active, but that's a whole other topic. We needed to tell the server what our valid locations were from Archipelago. And that's what this client AP scout packet is. It grabs all the valid locations, what items are in it, total spoilers, but it's never exposed to the player. It sends that to the server. The server saves that as a file under your name, so it can look up your specific items and locations and keep track of what you have done. Somewhere that this becomes very relevant is for traders. So the trader code actually looks at your spoiler log, and it replaces their items with your specific Archipelago items. And it does this every time that you open the trader. So you and I can be standing next to each other, and I will have a different set of items from the trader than you do when we open it. I think it's actually really cool. There are a limited set of built-in events that we can hook into for this kind of logic. In this case, on-player interact entity is something that the server exposes. So if we hop over to the API and we go to server, and we go to iServer Event API, this is where most of your API knowledge is going to come in handy. So we're going to scroll down to the bottom of the page. Each one of these pages lists events at the very bottom. And these are things that you can hook into, like we've already talked about. So we can get on-player interact entity. Now, we need to write a function that matches the delegate's definition. So we come in here and we see what does this function actually take as arguments. And we need to handle all of those in our own function. So we've got entity, iPlayer, item slot, vec3, etc. And we see that all here too. So you just pretty much want to copy paste this definition, change the name, remove the delegate, obviously. But if you have questions about what these give you access to, you could just click it right here, right? So what can an entity do? Well, an entity gives you access to all of these things, right? But it also gives you access to inherited members. So these are all the things that the upper level object inherits down to an entity. So because an entity is a register object, it also has a code. And this is, you're going to use this to define things by their in-game name. So if we go back to the code, we'll see that we are actually matching the trader's code to humanoid trader agriculture, for example. And that is because we found it in the registry object, right? So this is a lot of links, but if you know what you're looking for, if you know what you need to find, it's actually pretty well set up. It's not that bad. But again, reminder, it is important to click either client or server and go to its specific event API, because they will not cross over. There are client events that don't exist on the server. There are server events that don't exist on the client. There are common ones, but you need to know which side you're on. Otherwise, you'll cross that context threshold and get the crash. And it's exactly the same for the Archipelago multi-client.net library. If you come in here and you want to know what helpers do, there's like these nice little brief descriptions, but you should dig in deeper. You should come in here. It'll tell you what namespace you need to use. It'll tell you what properties it has. It does not do a great job of describing these. Total number of items received is not clear. We'll talk about that in a minute. So yeah, you can see like you can like get item name, long, and a string, and figure out what you need to do to accomplish these things. So last thing, really, I just want to walk through two major parts of the mod. One is receiving items from Archipelago, and the other is triggering achievements. They go the other way, and we're just going to walk through kind of the chain of events that make that happen. So if we go into multi-world AP client, right, and we go down a bit, we will see where our items actually come in. We are hooked into on item received. So every time an item is received, we're going to call process AP item queue. Now I've set it into a separate function so that I can call it manually. So we use session.items here, and we peek the next item, which just takes the top one off the queue that has not been processed yet. This is where the index comes in. We save the number of the last index that we processed. So if we have processed 10 items, we're going to save the number 10 into the context. And that is because every time you reconnect to Archipelago, it's going to resend all the items that you should have gotten. So if you don't filter out the old items, you'll get copies of all the items. And this took me a minute to figure out that this is what the index is for, but this is how you would use it. So coming from Archipelago, remember that that software has no idea about your game. It doesn't know your item codes. It doesn't know your item names. It doesn't know what an item is. It's just got strings, really. Now, I prefer to work in normal strings rather than codes. So when I wrote the AP world, I just used names of items that I could remember. I didn't go looking anything up. So we got like cookpot, bowl, barrel, quern, crucible. Now, these are not valid Vintage Story item names. In Vintage Story, for example, a quern can be made of 3 different materials. And so you've got quern andesite, quern granite. And so this word means nothing at all to Vintage Story. So we have to make that make sense somehow. So we've got this function resolve item code. And all this is a dictionary of matching. So when we get a quern, it actually translates to quern granite. And that is what we tell the server to give us. So I don't like doing a lot of work inside of callbacks. It tends to cause bugs and all kinds of timing errors. So I will generally use callbacks to add things to lists that are then processed regularly. To process something in Vintage Story mods regularly, you register what's called a game tick listener. And you do that at the top of your main file in start server or start client, depending on which context that you need. So for example, we have 2 register game tick listeners in the client side of our startup in main. And the 2 that are there, one is flush, that sends chat messages from Archipelago server in-game. That way we don't have to have a second text client up. And then the other one processes all the items that are in that list that we just added to. And it calls Infernet, which is that system that we built so that the 2 channels that the server and the client can talk to each other, it calls that to then send anything that's in that list to the server. So let's go take a look at that. All right, so every so many ticks, I think it's 3 seconds, we're going to call request AP item receive. And so it's going to check if there's anything in the list. It's going to take those, package up one of these packets that we built, send it to the server, and say, hey, we need these items. We have received these from Archipelago. On client AP item receive packet is server side. And when that gets a packet of this type, it responds in this way. So it gets the player, it gets their inventory manager, it gets the list out of the packet, it makes an item, and then down here somewhere it gives it to the player. If the player's pack is full, it pops it out right next to him. That's it. Now, a big problem that I ran into with Vintage Story mods is that some items that you would think are items are actually blocked. I didn't figure this out until the last day of the first draft of the mod. So, for a quern, for example, it's a block. It's not an item at all. Even though it's out in the world, it's acting like an item, it's a block. So, I needed to determine what's an item, what's a block. If we go back to the other file and look at our list here at the bottom, we actually resolve items into item : game : or block : game : That is because all the vanilla items are actually a mod of Vintage Story made by the developers. And so the prefix is game : for all the items. And so we put item or block, depending on which of these dictionaries it is in, because that's just how the game is split up. Kind of a hassle that we have to keep track of what is what, but it's fine in the end. If you just think things that I interact with are blocks, things that I do not interact with are items, you'll be okay. But if you get an error, I would try it the other way and see what works for you. So we split that string, item : game : the code, on colons. So that's going to give us 3 sections, 0, 1, and 2 of an array of strings. Stay with me here. So the first section, before the first colon, is going to tell us if it's an item or a block. The second one gets discarded because it's game for all of them. We're not supporting any mods right now. And then the third element, number 2, is going to be the actual name of the item that we want to add. Okay, so that's how outside items get in. When Archipelago says, Pokemon guy found your copper pickaxe, this is the chain it takes to get to our player. But what about our items going out? So if we head back over to main, we can see the achievements that we've set up. These are not linear, because the game doesn't work that way. They are just kind of loosey-goosey achievements that you can do whenever. So for example, if you use a quern, you will get the achievement Quernal Sanders. And every achievement will give you an item. Which item is based on your spoilers that was sent over from the Archipelago server. Let's look at an achievement. We're going to hook into those events that we talked about before on did use block. Okay, so anytime a player uses the block, the server, Sappy, look at that, make sure you pay attention which one you're using, do not cross context, will report that a block was used. That doesn't help us. We need to know which block, we need to know all of that. So let's go down to on did use block. Now the reason our dictionaries were set up that way with the item code and then the achievement name is so that we can check it lazily this way. When on did use block fires, we check the code of that item, and if that code is inside of our use block achievements dictionary, we do trigger achievement, the name, and we send that off. So what does trigger achievement do? Trigger achievement checks that you have not already done that achievement by looking in your spoilers log. It will remove things from your spoilers log as you do. We send you a little discovery message so it comes up across the screen, and we also call infranet.serverSendLocationCheck. What it's going to do is use the same server client channels that we set up to tell the client that it needs to do a location check on the location name. And then from there, the Archipelago multi-client.net library handles the rest. It just does the location check. It tells Archipelago to send the player whatever item was at that location. It's not important to you. It's important to them. But it gets sent. You don't have to do anything after that once it gets routed. And that's it. That is basically the whole mod. Those two things. Hooking into events, triggering achievements to tell the client, to tell the library, to check the location, which tells Archipelago to send the item to the appropriate player. And then when an item comes in from another player, giving it to our player. That's it. That's the whole mod. You could build this in a couple of days. So all these links are going to be in the description, but we're going to go through them one more time just so you have it fresh in your mind. What resources are actually helpful? Not Copilot, not AI. It sucks so bad. So we've got AP Quest is going to be a fantastic example of what to write in your Archipelago side file. You're going to want the reference to the Archipelago multiclient.net API. You're going to want the Vintage Story API GitHub. There was some useful stuff in here that was not elsewhere. You're going to want the Vintage Story Survival Mod GitHub. So in here, you can see some things that you can't see elsewhere. For example, we had to come in here to go to Systems and then Trading to figure out exactly what an entity trader is and how its item slots work. Right, so to figure out that its item slots, there were 15 of them, and some were buy slots and some were sell slots. All of that was learned from reading the code on this repo. So you definitely want to open up the VS Survival Mod GitHub. The actual Vintage Story docs here, right? These will let you figure out what events are in context, which ones are not, what is shared between the two, what you can access, what you can't. You can technically access pretty much anything if you go hard enough, but these are the supported things. This is what I stuck to. I'm just lazy. If you go to my GitHub, you can see exactly what I wrote to get here, including the files for Archipelago. So if you come in here and you look at locations, you'll see exactly what we defined as locations, and they're all achievement or traders. There is, of course, the mod is up if you want to give it a shot. I made a big mistake that I only realized between the last video and this one, which is that you can't get the steel anvil. You can't get the steel anvil, so make sure in options where it says steel, you just put it to false. Then the actual Archipelago site will help you in learning what the hell this even is. If you go to supported games, you find a game you want to play, like Mega Man Battle Network 3, and you go to setup guides, and English, it will explain exactly how to set up an Archipelago game to play, like from a user standpoint. What is this software? What is it even doing? It'll walk you through how to set it up, and then you'll have a better understanding of what it is we're doing. These guides are actually all pretty good. I need to write one. I have. And then finally, play Words Power.